The fact that the human race has been around since extreme antiquity and has been walking the earth for millions of years is barely a surprise for the sincere seekers interested in the true history of our planet. Probably the best compilation of scientific research and findings about humans on Earth millions of years ago is the compilation of Michael Cremo in his work Forbidden Archaeology. And now time has come to go beyond the stage of finding a few scattered evidences and artifacts here and there and add much more to the puzzle by finding out where did those people live and what kind of vehicles did they use. This episode will be, on one hand, a short general overview of three other lengthy videos, namely, first, the underground cities of Cappadocia, second, Turkish pre-flood archaeological sites, and third, cities millions of years old. And on the other hand, the latest updates will be included, so there will be new photos and new material from the very last expeditions in Turkey. Most of the work presented in this episode will be a research done by Alexander Kaltepin.
10-11 миллионов лет назад, уже с позднего Эоцена, и практически этот регион Турция представлял страну озер, болот, на Кавказе.
Let's start with what seems to be petrified car tracks from Turkey. These traces would be left if a current car passes through a muddy area, with the only difference that the tires would have to be smooth. No particular pattern print has been noticed, even at places where the tracks are well preserved, so it seems that the ancient tires didn't have much decoration. Also, this smoothness could suggest sledges, but that doesn't fit very well, for example, the turns. This particular bedrock layer, according to the geological map of Turkey, which no scientist disputes, was formed many millions of years ago, and at that time the rocks were in liquid state, or let's say muddy state. In other words, they were soft, and after once a vehicle would pass and form a certain track, the other vehicles wouldn't follow the same track because they would sink, and that's why they would pass next to the existing tracks, and that's exactly what we see on the ground now. Another confirmation as of the extreme antiquity of these tracks are the clearly visible signs of the process of mineralization. This is a geological process that takes many thousands and millions of years. Although opinions may vary how many millions of years it would take, still it is indisputable that it is a really long time, and such a mineralization is clearly visible on the tracks themselves, even on the lower surfaces. So this is not some sort of recent creation, recent track by any means. These vehicles' tracks are not visible everywhere, only in certain areas where the particular geological layer that they belong to is exposed after the upper layers have been eroded by the elements. In a couple of instances, attempts have been made to dig at the locations where the top layers are still intact, the layers that appear on the top of this layer with the tracks, and that has revealed that the tracks are present even so to say inside the earth. So they have been definitely formed before these layers got exposed nowadays. Or again, to put it yet in other type of words, we don't see all the tracks. Many of them are simply topped up with other layers and are inside the geological structure of our planet. Now, the researcher Andrei Kuznetsov just came back from Turkey, where besides the tracks, he also discovered and photographed various stone artificial formations, which many of them appear to be cut in the same layer as the tracks. Often they're located besides the tracks, or in some cases even on the tracks. Maybe the only difference with the tracks would be that in some cases this appears to have been done by some sort of tool after the stone has turned hard. Like for example, we will see staircases. There isn't much point to mold staircases out of soft mud. In other instances, tool marks are seen. Another proof that this has been done subsequently when the surface has already hardened and not when soft. That means when the tracks were made by the vehicles. Now here you see some of these structures along the tracks. Was this some sort of load that was unloaded? Here you see them overlapping the vehicle tracks. So was it a load? Were these remains of some sort of houses, or we really don't know. Some other steps, staircases you could see over there. So that was the difference with the tracks, but the similarity is that both the tracks and these structures, or artificial formations to be more precise, are subjected to severe erosion, result of millions of years being exposed and ground by the elements, and mineralization. Both erosion and mineralization are definitely observed clearly on both. So they would belong more or less to the same time period, but it doesn't mean that they were made exactly at the same time. At places, the vehicle's tracks appear very fresh. That's because they have been laid bare in relatively recent times. Yet at other locations, they are worn off completely and disappear. They cannot be seen anymore due to the very heavy erosion, and always there are cracks in them, as here you can see, due to their extreme age. And these cracks have appeared after these artificial formations have been made, not before that. And on these cracks themselves there is a secondary mineralization, again the geological process we mentioned earlier that takes thousands and millions of years, and erosion again on those very cracks, which again and again proves the extreme age of the tracks and the other artificial structures around them. You can find really a whole lot more information on these ancient tracks in my video called Millions of Years Old Vehicle Tracks in the Phrygian Valley of Turkey. And that includes a very detailed analysis of the mass media disinformation that this have anything to do with uh, cart ruts, cart tracks of supposedly some sort of a primitive ancient people. Similar tracks are found all over the globe, by the way. This is a map. I guess it is quite incomplete. In my previous videos, I've been showing the vehicle tracks from Bulgaria and also from the area of Azerbaijan. Here I've put only one mark on the map, but I guess that all the neighboring countries in that region would have such vehicle tracks because parts of the underground cities are sticking out of the ground over there as well, and usually the tracks and the cities go hand by hand in the same layer. Now these are the tracks found on the Azore Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. I cannot guarantee that everything that I said about the Phrygian Valley of Turkey geological situation is relevant in this case as well, but the tracks also show extreme erosion. Also they go into the sea deep underwater, so most likely they also are extremely ancient. Actually, these two images are taken in central Portugal, again in that area, but not exactly in on the Azore Islands. And these are the tracks of Syracuse, Sicily, Italy. These are the tracks of Tlaxcala, Mexico. Azerbaijan, Switzerland, France. And something similar in Bolivia. Maybe these are tracks as well. Now this is a footage of the Brazilian tracks, but again everything I said is confirmed only for the case of those in the Phrygian Valley of Turkey. Alexander Kaltepin has not done on-field research about all the other tracks, so they could be dated differently depending to the geological layer that they belong to, the science of erosion, and many other factors. The owners of these vehicles that left the tracks could have been living in these castles or stone dwellings or whatever you wish to call them. They are also seriously eroded. They barely look like something that is man-made. This is one instance that they go deep below water, not just shallow. They are seen many meters below water level. One more proof of their extreme antiquity. But of course, again, the main proof is the degree of erosion. These are textbook style examples of how much the stone can erode in millions of years. They are talking about 10, 20 millions of years. And this is not just in Turkey, for example, this is Italy, Israel, and this couple of photos are from Perperikon, Bulgaria, and that is getting increasingly famous nowadays. It definitely belongs to the same style of building, and it has the same degree of erosion. And these are not just the buildings that were carved into the solid rock. These are also megaliths of cyclopic proportions, just absolutely huge. This is how they would look from faraway hills that don't look from far away as having man-made structures on them. It is only upon close examination that one starts noticing windows and pools with a regular shape and gradually realizes that this is actually some sort of ancient fairy tale castle. If indeed these buildings, these megaliths, were carved a few hundred years ago, or maximum 1 or 2,000 years ago, as mainstream media is trying to convince the unsuspecting, trusting believers, then there should have been pretty large mountains of the leftovers of the stonework, and there isn't anything remotely nearly similar to that. Not only in Turkey but anywhere else, there are no leftovers at all. This image is a very good example. Part of the tracks are very well preserved, and one can see very well that really they were made in mud that later on got petrified, and then all of a sudden they are so eroded that they practically disappear. Another example here of how advanced the stage of erosion can be. This is how the floors of the lower floors of the underground cities in Turkey and Israel look like. This type of sedimentary rock formations are a result of really prolonged periods of being floors of rivers or seas or oceans. So these premises were flooded for really prolonged periods of time. A lot of lion images, but somehow these lions resemble more some prehistoric species that predated the current lions. They, their teeth and body shape resembles of the animals that supposedly lived millions of years ago. It really seems that these stones have experienced serious tectonic movements. And one of the most obvious proofs that these man-made structures were in existence already millions of years ago when the upper layers covered them is the fact that the upper layers have parts of the already eroded structures sticking in them. You may need to really strain your eyes for some time and really try to observe very keenly, and you will notice that although this protrusion sticking is not very obvious, it is there for sure. So when these ancient volcanoes were forming the upper layers, they were embracing the dwellings below them that were already eroded at that time. This is an illustration of the tectonic cracks that I mentioned earlier. If these were indeed some recent tracks 1 or 2,000 years old, they would crush, of course, the fragile cracks that were caused by the millions of years of tectonic movement, but this is not at all the case. The cracks follow the surface of the tracks because they appeared after the tracks. There is a playlist on my YouTube channel where you can find all my videos on Turkey, and over there you will find much more detailed information on the points that I touched only briefly in this summary video. But let's make one clarification. I often say that these artificial structures are millions of years old. Please take that to mean that they date to the times that the current mainstream history categorizes as millions of years old. In reality, all we can say for sure is that this was very long time ago, but when exactly we have no clue. Was it really millions or just many thousands of years ago? We don't know because, again, I have another full-length video on this subject, but there is not a single reliable scientific dating method that we could currently use and say for sure when this or that happened at all. All this carbon dating and dendrochronology and a few others I have reviewed in this video, they are much less reliable than we are led to believe by the mass media. So again, when I say millions of years old, please take it to mean extremely old for the sake of accuracy. And just a few more points that I did not mention even in the other videos about the underground cities. First of all, if they were really inhabited by some sort of primitive people couple of thousand years ago, how did they provide lighting in the underground cities? They did not use candles as primitive people tend to do in the imagination of the modern so-called historians, the mainstream historians. So what were they using? There were no candles because there are no signs of it. If there was a candle usage, there would be definitely deposits on the ceilings and the walls, but there is nothing like that. So this is one question, and another one is, these underground cities, they are many storied. Some reach, I don't know, over 20 stories or something, and archaeologists are still digging and still have not found the bottom. And when they come to the surface, one is impressed of how accurately measured are the floor distances, but we can see that because the earthquakes break the stones. And we notice, oh, the distance is so even all along. But when they were digging this in the solid rock, how would they determine this thickness? This is not very easy even with modern technology, what to speak of some supposedly primitive means. You will notice these surprisingly regular floors in my video about the underground cities of Cappadocia. Over there are plenty of examples of this. Some listeners of the previous videos were not satisfied by the presentation because it failed to mention the hypothesis that these cities were carved into the tuff stone. That's the name of the kind of stone. And according to, I don't know, some people who apparently fail to provide any demonstration but are very fluent in talking, this stone must have been soft like butter, and you could model anything you wish out of it with surprising ease, in the same way as the children make sand castles on the shore. And then this hypothesis goes further, that once the easily carved stone came in contact with air, then it immediately hardened all of a sudden and became very hard, and they could live in these quarters after that. Well, I don't know if that's true, but it's a bit a shaky hypothesis type for me, because if it was really so soft, then how come they were not falling through the floors as they're digging, or at least the ceilings were not falling on their heads, if we presume that they would never step on the soft floor? Some sort of technique like that, if that's possible at all. Even if they were digging only below it, still we see some pretty large holes, so the ceilings must have been falling on their heads like anything if it was really so soft. So that's why I didn't mention this hypothesis, and this is what I think of it. It is just a hypothesis at this point.